Cyberpunk.
Technology!
A science fiction subgenre usually linked to dystopian futures and gangsters with bad fashion sense. A subgenre filled with thematically depressing stories set in technologically advanced societies. A massive divide between the rich and the poor. It's like the Gilded Age, but with robots. And gay stuff. A lot of my own guilty pleasure anime happen to be cyberpunk shows. I usually bring up a couple every time I make an OVA video, but there was one in particular that I really wanted to talk about. I just felt like it should be its own video. And since you guys seem to like the Blood retrospective so much, I figured let's do the same thing for a similarly forgotten franchise. There's 6 shows to cover and 16 years to get through, so let's just get right to it. Normally, I'd hop right into a quick discussion about the production of the series, but for this one, I think we need to start with a brief introduction to Toshimichi Suzuki. He was a young, bright mind fresh out of college with big ideas but no money. He made ends meet by working at Tatsunoko Productions back in the 70s, but he found the shows they produced to be lacking in substance and style. He did make some important connections, though, in the animation world. Now, he worked mostly as a producer, although he did some illustration work on the side. It was some top-notch stuff, but it wasn't getting him the recognition he felt he deserved. All in all, things weren't so bad at Tatsunoko, but then one day in 1977, its founder, one of the greatest manga artists of all time, a true pioneer of the anime industry, Tetsuo Yoshida, tragically passed away of liver cancer. In that same year, Suzuki decided it was finally time to act on his ambition. He left Tatsunoko and created his own anime studio, one that would pioneer a new format for Japanese animation, a format that would go on to define the 1980s. Now, if you know anything about the anime industry in the 80s, you know it was all about the OVA. But now, do you remember the VHS? I'm gonna say probably because most of you guys are pretty old. But anyways, back in the late 70s, that was the new big thing. Home entertainment became a whole new market, although it took a minute for these animation studios to realize that. I need to clarify that Suzuki didn't create the first OVA. That honor goes to Bandai, who used it to market Mamoru Oshii's direct-to-VHS anime Dallos. But Suzuki was the first to realize just how lucrative the OVA format could be. Since these anime weren't subject to TV regulations, they could do and show a whole lot more than the stuff on the airways, but that also meant there was practically no quality control. Some of the OVAs released around this time were nothing more than shameless cash grabs or glorified ads for popular manga or video games. These subpar creations threatened to ruin the OVA name. Suzuki's new studio, Artmic, sought to change that. Suzuki ran a tight ship, and together with his creative staff, Artmic was able to create consistently quality original video animation. The first big one being a personal favorite of mine, Megazone 2-3. Halfway through that OVA series, Artmic pumped out 2 more, one of which would quickly become another big series for Artmic. But it's just a few months later, at the start of 1987, that Artmic would release the first big entry in their most popular franchise, Bubblegum Crisis. Hey look, it's blatant foreshadowing.
Our strength cannot be challenged. Good job.
Now at this point, Artmic had some clout, and they had some luck too. Suzuki just happened to run into a man named Junji Fujita, a man that just happened to be in charge of a big record label in Japan called Umex. The two were talking about the various projects each had in development, and Suzuki mentioned his intention to remake Technopolice 21C. Now that was a film which started as a pilot for a TV show that never got picked up. Production was a nightmare, to say the least, which shouldn't be too shocking, because this was Artmic's first project. After 4 years of working on that thing, Suzuki took everything they had and compiled it into an 80-minute film. You're not gonna believe this, but it wasn't very good.
That dog has stolen my toy!
Suzuki figured his studio was now better equipped to handle a project of this magnitude, and the new OVA format could be promising for a cyberpunk Monster of the Week type series. Fujita saw some promise in the project too, and wanted in, so he hit Suzuki with an offer. Umex would provide one of its singers to be the main character, and it would finance the production in exchange for some ownership of the IP. The deal was struck, but this new Technopolice OVA concept focused more on bounty hunters with alter egos and had a big emphasis on the music, so the Technopolice name got dropped. Instead, they decided to call it Bubblegum Crisis. In 2025, a major earthquake split Tokyo in two. The city fell into chaos, so the good old US of A was forced to make sure democracy survived. And survived, it did not, actually. The international megacorporation Genom seized the opportunity to handle the reconstruction effort and mold the city into its chief market. And the product? It's the problem. Boomers. No, not that kind. Boomers in the Bubblegum Crisis universe are the mechanical slaves to the post-industrial peoples of the modern world. They mostly handle menial and manual labor, but as of late they've been acting up, going berserk every other day. A special police force called the Advanced Police are supposed to keep the streets clean and the boomers in their place, but they aren't very good at their job. That's why a new vigilante group has entered the scene to fight rogue boomers for a price, all the while trying to keep their identities and their technologies a secret. Priss Asagiri, Celia Stingray, Nene Romanova, Lena Yamazaki. They are the Night Sabers. We got the cool girl, the capable girl, the cutesy girl, and the clumsy girl. That's right, gamers. This is a gang of gals, a tuna team, Muff members. Okay, yeah, that's Vag Vigilante. Actually, there's a little boy who sometimes gets involved, although he doesn't really do any fighting or assisting or really anything. If he does show up in an episode, it's because he's trying to sneak some peeks at those beautiful young women. A little rascal. Wait a minute, isn't that one your sister?
Oh, that's nasty.
It's on a night no different from any other that the highly militarized AD Police fight a losing battle against a rogue boomer to the tune of an absolute banger that's being performed live by Priss. She's a hot-headed, moody motorcycle enthusiast, and do you hear that raspy voice?
胸のバッジミラーわかるよ。私ポリス嫌いなのよね。特に AD ポリスはね。
That is the war cry of Big Tobacco's strongest soldier. After her show ends, a charming AD police officer, Leon McNichol, tries to shoot his shot with the underground star, but the babe is bulletproof. Meanwhile, Celia Stingray just received a request for assistance from the Space Defense Force of all people. They need the Night Sabers to find an abducted technician and his little sister Cynthia. They also sort of want to study the hard suits worn by the Night Sabers so they could maybe make some suits for themselves. You see, the military has something of an industrial complex. Priss eagerly sets off to ask around town and finds her target in record time by getting abducted by the same people. Turns out the technician is a boomer who stole Cynthia away from Genom, and Cynthia is also a boomer, and a very special one at that. She's able to synchronize with one of the orbital particle beam satellites and fire that sucker at as many Afghani weddings as you could ever want. Priss is in a pickle, but luckily the other Night Sabers show up to save the day, and Leon even tagged along too. But the gang of rogue boomers refuses to go down without a fight. The leader transforms into, whatever that is, and starts to infect the building and all the tech inside, eventually morphing into a new age Nephilim. He looks pretty tough but goes down easy after Priss merges with her motorcycle and jumps inside him, landing a devastating blow in the process. The giant is down but not out for the count, and infects Cynthia as a last-ditch effort to win. The Genom Vice President Mason flies by in a helicopter and, seeing that Cynthia has been compromised, orders the military to use the space cannon and blow everything up. The Night Sabers managed to get out, but the surrounding area went into the ocean, and since Cynthia bought the farm, they don't get paid. But the worst thing that happened was that Leon fumbled a forehead kissy from Best Girl.
少しは庶民のために役立つことしたじゃないか。ありがとうよ。
そりゃないぜ。彼女一体。ま、いいか。
Genom covers up the whole affair, calling it an accidental discharge chalked up to military incompetence. All the while, the vice president of the company sent some divers to recover Cynthia's black box, so he can incorporate the satellite stuff into his super boomer pet project. Priss meets up with Leon to compare notes and get a free meal, while Lena does some aerobics because it's the 80s. That's where we find out she's got a friend whose boyfriend worked for Genom, but suspiciously went missing without a word not too long ago. Genom catches wind of this girl's whining, so they dispatch a team of lesbians to do what they do best. Then there's a bit of a fight that ends with a surprise appearance by the aforementioned Super Boomer, but he's no match for the Night Sabers. Even though they've now stopped Mason twice, the city is pretty much the same. Boomers going ballistic every day, lots of random death and destruction and whatnot, but there are some moments of levity and leisure, like when Priss gets to meet up with a little boy at night for some fun. Probably could have phrased that better. The kid's dad died, so he lives with his mom in some crappy apartment owned by Genom. The problem is that Genom is about to demolish the thing unceremoniously. The mom runs in to save the family album, but doesn't make it out in time. Priss is pissed and decides to do what reasonable people do in situations like these. Technically, pursuing personal vendettas violates the Night Sabers' code of conduct, but the code is more guidelines than actual rules. But speaking of personal vendettas, Celia has one too, involving Mason. See, her dad used to work for Genom, and he's actually the one who created the Boomers, but Mason had him murdered and covered the whole thing up. Now he's deciding it's time to personally deal with the Night Sabers since they keep screwing up all his plans. But this time, he screws it up all by himself when he takes his helmet off to gloat. The city is saved, Mason is dead, and Priss managed to find a home for her friend who's a boy. And that is just the first 3 episodes. In episode 4, we see the Night Sabers take a little time out for some well-earned R&R with a hard R. It's a one-off episode that focuses more on fleshing out the world and telling a small contained story by introducing a handful of new characters that will never show up again. So, you know, filler.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
This episode is all about a mysterious driver with questionable morality that does some pretty heinous things for the sake of his sweetheart's safety. The path he's going down is as dark as the pavement beneath his ride. Every time he steps into that car, he struggles to keep his grip on humanity. He even merges with the closest thing he has to a friend, but underneath it all, he's still a real human being. And maybe, just maybe, a real hero too. He gets arrested at the end. Okay, next episode. We open on a space supply center and a bunch of girls running from scary robots with teeth. Only 2 of the new faces survive the pursuit and make their way to Earth, where one of the girls, Sylvie, becomes fast friends with Priss. Completely unrelated to this, the AD Police are getting reports of vampire attacks all over the city. Not actual vampires, of course, but every victim appears to be drained of its blood. Leon thinks it could be an old type of boomer that's supposed to be illegal and starts investigating against orders as usual. He learns about this DD special semi-intelligent battlesuit that was on the ship that fled the space station. Now, normally it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but this suit came with an atomic deadman switch that could potentially go off at any moment. So to avoid Not Night City getting Nagasaki'd, he gets in a badass suit to fight the baddie, but it does pretty badly and things look bad. Until the Night Sabers show up. Celia's informant had given her a rundown of all the things she needed to hear to figure out where to be. The so-called vampire was actually a modified sex bot, and that modified sex bot was, you guessed it, the new girl. She went around town sucking people off so she could keep her injured friend alive through blood transfusions of a somewhat sapphic nature. You know, that's noble, I think. Unfortunately, the DD suit fused with her, so now they gotta kill this chick. With her dying breath, Sylvie gives Priss the data she stole from Genom. It's gonna help her friend, Oomori, who's also a sex bot. With this data, she won't have to go around town sucking people off in order to survive. Also, there's this new guy named Largo who has quickly risen in the ranks at Genom. He doesn't do anything during the vampire fiasco except sound awfully shady. He seems to have a grudge against one Celia Stingray, and Genom too by the looks of it. He makes his own team of Night Saber lookalikes to wreak havoc on Genom and get some top secret information crucial for his master plan, all while also framing his sworn enemies. It looks pretty bad for the Night Sabers. Besides now having to deal with the AD Police, they have some internal problems too. Priss can't bring herself to don the suit anymore. Sylvie's death really took a toll on her, and without their best fighter, Celia, Nene, and Lena, they're just struggling to get the job done. Meanwhile, Largo is doing some corporate espionage and kidnapping important people, and who else but Oomori is helping him out? Priss just happens to see her while she's out for a drive 2011 and follows her since she's supposed to have left the city some time ago. Leon had also been following Oomori and Largo, but once he catches up to them, he once again realizes he's in way over his head. Henri and Largo get away, and Priss decides it's time to come back. She suits up for a solo up and heads over to Genom HQ. Largo is already there, risen up the CEO, making threats, using space lasers to destroy every one of Genom's towers all across the world in a matter of seconds, the whole art of the deal. When Priss gets there, things get messy. Henri finds out she killed Sylvie, so she stabs her. But then she realizes she's just being used by Largo, so she sacrifices herself to save Priss. Largo then calls in the reinforcements, and Priss finds herself on the brink of death. But luckily, literal plot armor falls from the sky, and she manages to survive just long enough for the rest of the Nightsabers to show up. Together, they defeat Largo and disable the orbital satellite, but who knows if the city is finally safe. Is this the end? Maybe it should have been, because it's more of a finale than the actual finale. Now, before we talk about the last two episodes, I need to give you a little more context so you understand why both of them are more or less self-contained one-offs. Artmic had a lot of money to play around with in the late 80s thanks to the high sales of Megazone 2-3. This was a source of pride for Suzuki because, unlike other anime companies at the time that kept pursuing adaptations of popular manga, his company was taking risks with unique and original stories, and they were making a lot of money doing it too. Now, the way Artmic operated was a little different from other anime studios. Artmic had a core staff of character designers who often doubled as scriptwriters, but the actual animation part was usually outsourced to other studios. Suzuki oversaw everything and often provided guidelines for the story and theme if he didn't already decide to handle the whole writing process himself. And man, did he have some ideas. Now, I found this interview by Animerica from 1993, and yeah, we're kind of jumping ahead in the timeline here, but I'm pretty sure Suzuki still had this mindset when he started Bubblegum Crisis. He talks about how all of his big OVA series are linked to each other thematically, although it's possible he was aiming to connect them all to the same shared universe at some point too. He was very interested in the role of machines in the modern man's world. Technology wasn't inherently a problem, but things could get out of hand real quick if we aren't careful. And by things, I mean corporations. Suzuki really hated corporations. Suzuki's animosity was more directed at the big record companies like Toshiba, of which Umex was a subsidiary. Now, if you recall from earlier, Umex collaborated with Suzuki to make Bubblegum Crisis. Umex provided the soundtrack and a singer to be the main star, and Artmic would do basically everything else. Now, I'm gonna make a claim here that I can't substantiate, but I think the circumstantial evidence is on my side. Somewhere around episode 3 or maybe 4, Suzuki must have had some regrets about his deal with Umex. Obviously, there's the money to complain about. Artmic couldn't pocket all of the cash for itself, it had to split it with Umex, and that goes for the DVD sales and the OST sales. But another problem was Priss. Or, well, Kinuko Oomori, the voice behind Priss. It's not that she did a bad job or that the fans didn't like her, it's that she only ever looked at the role as a springboard for her music career. And after the first few episodes of BGC, that goal had already been achieved, and she was already thinking of going to a new record label, which is a problem. Because if this chick is with a record label that isn't Umex, then she can't sing without causing a lawsuit. Suzuki's solution to this problem was, let's just kill her. The character, not Oomori, although, hey, he may have been considering that option too. That brings us back to the series with episode 7. There's a business deal going down between Genom and Gulf and Bradley, another company that manufactures boomers. At the same time, a pop idol who goes by the name Vision is on her way to Mega Tokyo to kick off her world tour. At least that's what the public thinks. The truth is she's some Chinese mafia heiress who's just itching to get revenge on the people who killed her little sister, someone we actually saw in episode 2. That was Irene, and this one is Reika. While Irene was a little naive and helpless, Reika has a bodyguard who doesn't pull punches. And even though she herself might hesitate to pull the trigger, she has no problem getting her hands dirty for the sake of vengeance. She drugs and kidnaps one of the scientists who worked on Mason's secret super boomer project, all to lure out the Genom CEO. Unfortunately for her, the Nightsabers were hired to protect that scientist. It is a little odd that things play out like this, but Genom knows firsthand just how effective the Nightsabers are. And, well, as for the Nightsabers, they're like mercenaries or bounty hunters or whatever. The point is 50 million is 50 million. But even with all that monetary motivation, the Nightsabers aren't able to stop Reika. The tech she has at her disposal is just way too good, even better than the heart suits it seems, which is exactly why when Priss goes up against Reika's bodyguard, she dies. No, she doesn't actually die. Unsurprisingly, Suzuki and the other writers did not go through with the whole killing Priss to avoid potential legal problems plan. But why? Well, some observant fans caught wind of the situation and made it known to Artmic that they would not buy any related Bubblegum Crisis merchandise if Priss died. So that's why she doesn't die, she just gets a broken arm. Anyways, the Gundam CEO gets away, or rather, he was never really there to begin with. And Lena smacks some sense into Reika about the whole revenge thing. Oh yeah, I kind of forgot to mention Lena was pretty good friends with Irene, and also she got kidnapped at some point too. It doesn't really matter. The point is Reika will continue with her music career instead of being a vigilante because that's what her sister would want her to do. Yeah, you can tell this one went through some rewrites. You can also tell they were basically going to replace Priss with Priss, which is something you do actually see in the final episode with that brief Reika cameo at the drive-in theater. And just for the sake of completion, let's go ahead and plot summarize that final episode. It's a Nene-centric episode, where the pretty pink police girl has to babysit the chief's niece, who just happens to be a journo, interested in the Night Saber's secret identities. But honestly, most of the episode is just the girls picking on Nene for being weak and getting fat. Very cool. But she does get an upgraded suit by the end with a new color scheme, so all that character building was probably worth it. There's nothing too crazy going on in this one. There's some disgruntled Gundam scientist who decides to release his newest type of boomer on the AD Police headquarters, all while Nene and the chief's niece are still inside. They struggle, they fight, they get under each other's skin, and then they become friends after saving the day. Simple stuff. Pretty anticlimactic for a finale, but honestly, it might be the best episode out of the bunch. I mean, it really is fun.
Oh, AD Police さんよ。この私から切符切ろうなんて思ってんじゃないだろうね。
And it really gets its characters too. I feel like this was the first episode to truly understand how to use the main girls, and even Maki too. I mean, the banter is great, the visual humor is on point, and the animation is top-notch stuff. Yeah, sure, the story is simple, but simple's fine by me. And believe me, I'm not the only one who liked this episode either. You guys know about Oh My Goddess? Wait a minute, let me upset my enemies. You guys know about Megumi-sama? Well, the author of that manga wasn't too sold on the whole OVA thing until he saw this episode of BGC and decided he wanted the same director to direct his thing. And the crazy thing is, this was Hiroaki Gouda's first time actually directing something. It's a real shame he didn't direct any of the other episodes, but I guess Artmic was saving the best for last. Well, I mean, obviously they weren't, because this was not supposed to be the ending. So what happened? A couple of things. Artmic had some financial problems because OVAs just weren't selling like they used to. In '85, Megazone 2-3 casually cracked 100,000 sales, but fast forward to '91, and the major hits are missing a zero on that figure. Less sales mean less money, which means less quality, which means less good OVA. Generally speaking. Probably the bigger problem, though, was the problem that had been there since basically the beginning. Oomori. After episode 3, she had signed a deal with Sony, which meant she technically couldn't sing in Bubblegum Crisis anymore. They mostly got around that by changing the name and the credits and having an ensemble cast for most of the performances, but any solo song that's sung in episode 4 onward isn't sung by Oomori. That's why you really only get the one performance by Blonde Wig Priss in episode 1. Having Oomori involved started to be more trouble than it was worth. So Suzuki, Oomori, and Umex all decided it was in their best interest to just end the collaboration then and there. They all walked away with something nice. Oomori had her big break, Umex made a decent profit, and Suzuki had proved once again why Artmic is the definitive OVA studio. And then Suzuki screwed everything up by making Bubblegum Crash.
We'll take them together. You're going slowly on the left.
Taking him now.
No!
Suzuki.
No! No!
Now, Suzuki understood that Artmic and Umex both had rights to BGC, but Bubblegum Crash was not Bubblegum Crisis. Sure, it's a sequel, but it didn't feature anything Umex made. The soundtrack was handled by a different group, and Priss had a new VA. Remember, all the story and the character stuff, that was all made in-house by the guys at Artmic, so there shouldn't be any problem with continuing the story, right?
How can you do this? This is outrageous. It's unfair.
Umex sued Artmic, and Artmic lost. A lot. Because Artmic had already stacked up a sizable debt, making all of their other different OVA series. So, they went bankrupt. It didn't go too well for Umex either. They had actually co-signed the loans Artmic could no longer pay, and it turned out Umex couldn't pay either. So Toshiba EMI stepped in to essentially dissolve Umex. So much for their happy ending. But at the very least, we got Bubblegum Crash. Was it worth it? No? It's been a couple years since we last saw the Night Sabers, and by the looks of things, we may never see them again. Priss' singing career has taken off, and Lena is a crypto bro now. As for Celia, we don't really know. She seems to have taken off a little while back without telling anyone why. The only Night Saber who's still doing the whole Night Saber thing is Nene, actually. She's trying to keep the dream alive, and since she still works as an AD police officer, she knows just how bad things really are. There's this new gang in the city decked out in military-grade power suits, and the AD police are struggling to rein them in. They also appear to be working under the direction of a mysterious man behind the scenes interested in AI. Then Celia makes an unexpected return to Mega Tokyo, and she reveals the Night Sabers will not be disbanding anytime soon. In fact, she's been spending all of her time preoccupied with the newest job for the group. They need to fight the power suit punks, who are apparently led by some guy who's dead. Priss and Lena escape the wage cage, and the Night Sabers face off in full against the newest threat. They lay a trap and clean up the mess, but fail to find anything out about the man pulling the strings. And not long after, they get involved with a quaint-looking boomer who, despite appearances, acts more human than any of the other boomers so far. That's because he's a prototype created by one of the few surviving scientists that originally created the boomers, along with Celia's father. This boomer is named Adama, and by the skin of his non-existent teeth, he manages to escape the clutches of those who would seek to control the world by using his AI. He bumbles his way into meeting Priss, who isn't too happy about having to protect him. She does a pretty good job, though, up until he dies. Once again, there was some man who was playing 4D chess behind the scenes, and Celia just wasn't able to bring him to justice yet. But she doesn't have to wait too long for another chance.
Tide awakens now. Death to foolish mankind. All power to the Uber Revolution.
A fatwa has been issued against the fleshy kafir by the elusive Iman himself. The horde of rogue boomers merge together and infect the city landscape with tentacles and such. So the Night Sabers spring into action to end this fiasco once and for all. The boomer is beaten, but there's a nuclear reactor underneath Mega Tokyo that's about to react. This was Largo's plan all along. Yeah, Largo. He's been surviving in the shadows this whole time, waiting for the right opportunity to strike. The girls hold off the remaining boomers while Celia goes for Largo, who reveals his final form. He also reveals that there may be more to Celia than meets the eye. She's just like him, for real, so on and so forth. While she's, doing her thing, the other girls are getting manhandled. But by the power of feminine friendship, Celia comes to her senses and blasts Largo away. With the day saved, Celia heads off to Germany to do some research with her brother, and the girls get the AD police guys to buy him some burgers. And if you stick around till after the credits, you'll be treated to a teaser for a sequel that will never happen.
Mankind will likely befoul and destroy this beautiful planet. No civilization will remain afterward. Would that satisfy you?
Bubblegum Crash was never meant to be a separate series. They did take this opportunity to introduce certain design changes, but they're not very big. It really is just the last few episodes that would have been the finale to Bubblegum Crisis, had that series not been discontinued prematurely. And speaking of, Crash was also discontinued prematurely.
What a twist!
You can tell this was supposed to be longer based on how rushed everything feels. Suzuki did state in the past that BGC was intended to be 13 episodes, and some quick math reveals we're too short. Would 2 more episodes make Crash, and by extension Bubblegum Crisis, feel more complete? Probably not. Crash is, pretty boring. You really feel the 40-minute runtime on those episodes. But now here's a pro gamer tip, alright? Watch the English dub. It is a fascinating experience.
Perhaps Adama has need of the supercomputer.
Supercomputer?
But now that we have a full picture of the mainline OVA series, I can talk about what this series did great and what it did less so. First off, the visuals. They look great. Mega Tokyo is a beautiful setting, filled with characters rocking some of Kenichi Sonoda's best designs. The heartsuits for the Nightsabers look pretty great, and I am really glad they actually look like they could protect the ladies who wear them, unlike, other female armors. The look of the AD Police also goes hard. The gas mask and red eye combo can never be beaten. The boomers generally look pretty good too, although I'll be honest, I'm not too crazy about all the tentacles that start to become more pronounced the further into the series you go. The only problem I have is more of a preference, if anything. I wish things looked a little more cyberpunk. I mean, I'm not saying it needs to look like cyberpunk, but sometimes the designs felt outdated for the scenery. And that's actually something Crash did pretty well, with all the boomers wandering about the city and more scenes with trademark 80s cyberpunks. But one thing that both parts of Bubblegum Crisis do a good job of showing is the international element. Tokyo has never looked so diverse, and probably never will. They really earned that honorary Aryan status. Turns out Hyperborea was in Hokkaido the whole time. But really, I do find this pretty interesting because anime didn't have too much of an international presence at this point. I mean, technically the Cool Japan movement started around this time, but it didn't really take off until the mid-90s and early 2000s. Unlike with, say, Blood the Last Vampire, the American market was not a factor in the production phase. You gotta remember, America specifically had a long-standing view of animation as something for the kids, and Suzuki understood that. So it was more of an accidental discovery that so many Western barbarians actually watched these Chinese cartoons. Did that inform later developments at Artmic regarding Bubblegum Crisis? Sure. That's why we got an American-made comic published by Dark Horse in '94 specifically intended for the American fans. But again, getting in the good graces of the international market was more of a pipe dream than an actual plan. That's why I find it so interesting that half of the main cast of Bubblegum Crisis is mixed race. Suzuki doesn't frame it as inherently an issue, and most of the foreigners are portrayed positively, but still, his tone when describing the particulars of his brave new world is less than enthusiastic. When asked about how Bubblegum Crisis managed to get so popular in the West, Suzuki claims it's because the themes are universal, regardless of culture. You can be from any country in the world and still resonate with the series. But then he goes on to say this: 50 years from now, it'll be a world mixed with various races. When you see all these Leons and Prisses, the foreigners and public agencies, and names like Carson popping up in the Japanese government, you should be aware that it's intentional. There's some nationalism left in the world, but mostly, it's giant corporations. In my book, the corporations walk the earth as if it were their own. We have multinational corporations in the world now. These supranational attitudes are gradually taking it over. In theory, they may be talking about the Japanese or the Americans, but really, that era has vanished. We're becoming a world where the corporations have the power. Okay, all right, look, I'm only laughing because, like, if you throw a couple parentheses in there, it really looks... Like, I don't know. I just thought Suzuki hated the record labels, but maybe this goes one step higher. For context, one of the main reasons for Japan's impressive economic growth in the 1980s had to do with its relationship to the greatest democracy the world has ever known. After Uncle Sam burned down Japan, the United States launched an effort to reconstruct the region. Truly, one struggle. Anyways, the upswing was that the US would subsidize the Japanese economy, buy a bunch of Japanese products, and turn a blind eye to certain trade practices. All of these things culminated in Japan having the second largest GNP behind only these United States. Yeah, I mean, sounds pretty great, right? Well, if you only care about money, but if you care about culture, then it's a little concerning. Western clothes became the standard fashion. You'd see ads for American brands all over the place, and Hollywood blockbusters dominated the cinema. And yeah, Japan has never been too keen on immigration, but even that started to change in this time too. Everything seemed like it was changing, and for some, that change was too drastic and happening too quickly. Bubblegum Crisis may not go as hard in the paint as other anime from the era regarding this topic, but the sentiment is still there. Alright, let's talk about the gays now. Leon's partner, who is not his partner, is pretty gay. Some have considered this to be a really big deal because he's one of the first openly gay characters in anime that's not evil or portrayed negatively, but to be honest with you, he doesn't really do all that much besides banter with Leon, so yeah, take that for what it's worth. Also, just to remind you, he's very flamboyant, and his name is literally Daily Wong.
そうカッカしちゃダメ。気晴らしに今夜付き合ってやるわよ。どう？モーテルにでも。
What are you fucking gay?
Animation-wise, the thing is cinema. Most of the time. Yeah, sure, there are some animation errors, and certain segments can look stiff, but more often than not, you're getting something fun to look at. Usually around the time the action scenes start. Now, this is an OVA, so inconsistent quality is kind of the standard, but I'd say BGC at its worst still looks pretty good. If we're talking Crash, though, it's a little mid. It's probably because Artmic partnered with someone else for that one.
Do they have any weak points?
I can't tell! My scanners have no effect on them!
What do we do? There's only one bulkhead left.
In 5 minutes, Mega Tokyo will be blown to bits!
Then there's the OST. Peak 80s sound. Not to mention the way it's incorporated into the show. It's like each episode has its own music video. But, once again, Crash kind of weighs things down. The soundtrack there is fine, but Umix really did bring some banger music to the table. But what about the story? Well, you are not watching this thing for the story. Actually, alright, let me amend that. You are not watching this thing for the overarching story. To say it's poorly thought out is completely accurate. If you read some interviews with Suzuki, you'll see him bring up some big ideas and philosophical debates, warnings even, about man's relationship to the machine. What will humanity look like if it continues to innovate and invent new technologies that stand to rewrite the very foundations of human society? At what point does the machine become man? Or is man already the true machine, polluting the earth with every operation we compute? Cool ideas, but that's not the show. BGC is just cute girls shooting robots. I mean, it does, on occasion, try to say something more, but it never has much weight because of the characters. If we're talking about the main characters, they're just kind of there. They don't get much to do besides shoot robots, except for Priss. She does get a romance subplot with Leon, a friendship with a boomer, and generally speaking, most episodes put her center stage. All of these things allow her to be fleshed out at the expense of her gal pals. Let's run through the list. Celia is supposed to be the leader, but she only suits up like half of the time and there's no reason given why. She sometimes does and sometimes doesn't. It's like they don't know what to do with her besides letting her finance the Nightsabers and pick out the missions. Then there's her personality, which is just all over the place. One moment she's a stoic, mature woman who can keep her personal feelings from influencing tough decisions. And then the next she's getting embarrassed when telling Nene the next target is a sex bot. Like, why are you getting flustered talking about this stuff? You run a lingerie store. I also think they gave some of her traits to Priss because people just really liked Priss. Like in episode 2 of Crash, Priss is the one who has to babysit a boomer, and she's not all that happy about it because apparently she really hates boomers. In fact, she seems to hate them the most out of all the Nightsabers. And I'm not saying it's weird that someone who fights boomers all the time hates them, but I am saying it's weird that Priss, who befriended a boomer and fell into a depression after she died, says she hates boomers. I would have thought Celia hated boomers the most since she's the most tied to them. In her mind, it's the boomers who got her father killed. I mean, yeah, Mason is the one who's mostly responsible, but he killed Celia's father because of the boomers he created. Plus, when she dealt with him, he just came back as a boomer, so even more reason for her to hate them, right? I just think it should have been Celia who had to protect this boomer and finally see what her father saw in them. I mean, you could even have a source of conflict between her and her brother by having Maki be fascinated by boomers while she absolutely despises them. I mean, I'm just throwing around suggestions here because after episode 3 of BGC, Celia's past doesn't really matter that much. Now, it is true that they were probably going to double down on what Largo alluded to in the final episode of Crash. Maybe Celia is some kind of advanced boomer, or a boomer human hybrid, or something boomer related, but they never got around to saying anything definitive, and even if they did, it probably wouldn't have gone anywhere or changed anything. I mentioned it before, but it's really weird that Celia works for Genom in episode 7, the same company that killed her dad, and she hardly even argues about it. Now, there's a very obvious conflict there that should have been explored and maybe resolved, but they just outright skip over it. And now, you could say that's proof of her being stoic and mature, but even if that's true, it's a missed opportunity. If you just wanted to show her stoicism, then you could have had another member of the Night Sabers like Priss vehemently oppose the mission until Celia, barely managing to hold in her rage and grief, makes it clear how important these missions are to the Night Sabers' cause. As it stands, her character just feels hollow. And Lena has a similar problem. Celia's at least got some development in the first arc of the show, but Lena? I mean, she does aerobics, and then she decides to do stocks for like half an episode. What else? Oh yeah, she also falls down sometimes. Yeah, that's really about it for her character. There is something of a running joke that Lena has a new boyfriend every week, but we never see her go boy crazy or anything like that. She's just kind of there.
なんだよ一体。見て見て、ちょっといい男。なんで女付きじゃんか。Her big moment in the show isn't even about her. It's about the Priss clone. And that moment just boils down to Lena reciting the feelings of her dead friend. This shit got shafted. Nene actually fares a little better because she had a whole episode devoted to her, but still, that's like half the team that doesn't really matter. More than half if we include Maki. I'm not saying all of them needed to be dynamic characters that directly influence the overarching plot. I mean, Leon is basically the same guy start to finish, and he keeps failing hard every episode, but he's my second favorite character in the whole series. But what I mean is that if we're gonna have a main team, it shouldn't feel like a solo act. I struggle to believe Suzuki when he says they planned for 13 episodes, because to me, it feels like they planned for 3. The first 3, to be specific. Those episodes are all connected to each other and build up to a confrontation between Celia and Mason. We get a one-off with episode 4, which felt like a move to buy some time for the writers to come up with the next multi-episode arc. And the next multi-episode arc is only 2 episodes instead of 3, and it resurrects Mason with no explanation whatsoever. Then there's episode 7, which exists solely to introduce a character who never comes back. I'm sure the initial plan behind her was to have a few episodes with her fighting alongside the Night Sabers against Ganem and maybe other boomer companies outside of Japan, but that all got scrapped. So that's why we get another one-off episode like episode 4, albeit one that feels more important since it's about Nene. But then we return to an overarching story with Crash, and it's 2 mostly one-off episodes, and a third that's a final confrontation with Largo, who is once again resurrected with no explanation. Do you see why I doubt Suzuki had 13 episodes planned from the beginning? The main story feels slapped together. It's like they had no real idea where to take things after episode 3, so they just kept redoing the first arc. As for the one-off episodes, they're pretty fun, but their inclusion means there's less time to develop the overarching narrative, to fill out the pages of these character stories. We don't get any of that here. All we're given are questions. And when asked about those questions, Suzuki claims he could just answer them, but instead chooses to say he doesn't know. But what's the truth? Does he know? Does he truly believe that the fans should be able to answer any and all questions by thinking critically about what they've been shown? Or does he not know? Because he was so scatterbrained thinking about all the big philosophical questions, he lost the plot. I think the truth is, Suzuki and the other writers employed the "dude, wouldn't it be cool?" method to writing. And to be clear, it absolutely worked. The show is pretty cool. It's just, well, like I said, you're not watching it for the story. Now, there is a pretty big reason why these characters are very static, and why these episodes are often self-contained. It's easier to sell the OVA to people who haven't necessarily watched the whole thing. Each episode was sold separately on release, so there was no guarantee that the store you went to had a copy of each episode. Because the story is so bare bones, you could theoretically watch any episode and more or less figure out the series so far without partaking in the priors. I mean, I guess that's a W for the marketing team, but it does lead to very rushed storylines and character dynamics that should have been developed over multiple episodes. I'm thinking of things like how episode 5 introduced a completely new character that immediately became a closer friend to Priss than any of the other Night Saber members, and all of that happened off-screen within the same episode. I have no idea how they bonded so quickly, if they have any common interest, or how they even met. I don't know. Their relationship means nothing to me because I haven't seen anything. And that's a really big problem because this character's death will continue to be important for the rest of the series. It would have been better to have her already be on Earth during episode 1 and have her story slowly play out in the background for the next 4 episodes. Each episode could have an update on the latest vampire attack until we finally find out in episode 5 it's been this chick's
chick the whole time. Now, obviously, I'm not accounting for budget constraints with this next point, but had episodes 2 and 3 had the same runtime as numero uno, I think this idea could have been implemented. But again, I really don't know how much of this character, and by extension the larger story involving them, was nailed down back in episode 1. I could bring up some other things too, but look, this is just a retrospective, not a rewrite. BGC is fine for what it is. My main problem is just that it could have been so much more. Alright, as you can see, talking about what could have been is going to be a recurring theme in this video. And it applies even more so with the next entry on the list, AD Police Files. It's a spin-off series, released when Bubblegum Crisis was at its most popular. It's a prequel set a few years prior to the Night Saber's introduction. You don't see Priss, Celia, Lena, or Nene, but there is Leon, who just got transferred from the normal police into the newly created Advanced Police. There are only 3 episodes and each cover an individual case file, hence the name. The first is called The Phantom Woman. Leon has just started out with the AD Police. Back when he was still with the normal police force, he had a little incident with a female boomer that was illegally turned into a sex bot thanks to some underground replacement parts. And it seems like history is repeating itself. Another female boomer is going berserk outside a shop, and the AD Police are called in to take her down. They manage to, but not before she murks one of the officers after a struggle. Leon and his senior officer Gina don't even have time to mourn their fallen comrade before a bean counter starts claiming there's some life insurance fraud going on, so that policy isn't going to get paid out to his family anytime soon. Leon and Gina decide to launch a private investigation to prove the boomer really was rogue and that their friend just got unlucky. They follow some leads, get in contact with a hacker, and find out about an underground sex boomer business that's linked to a particular boomer whose defective sexy parts keep getting recycled into other boomers, causing them to go crazy. One such boomer makes a pass at Leon, but doesn't realize he's a true cell. Angered by his commitment, she attacks, and Leon once again finds himself in the very same position as before, only this time, Gina is there to finish the fight. Leon is saved, the proof is procured, and the insurance is paid out. Happy ending, I guess. Episode 2 is The Ripper, and focuses on a normal female cop. I mean a normal cop who's female, there's no such thing as a normal female. Her name is Iris Cara, and she has to deal with some serial killer who's cutting down prostitutes on a subway line notorious for being... yeah, put 2 and 2 together. Some suspect the suspect is a boomer based on how brutal the scenes are, but Iris isn't so sure. She thinks it's a human, and a woman at that, just like Jack the Ripper. Oh, right. Regardless, the AD Police need to be kept informed since it may involve them. So Iris volunteers to handle the case and talk with good old Leon and Gina. All her investigating makes her eye hurt, so she decides it's finally time to cybermax. She goes to a cybernetic replacement center to schedule herself in for some surgery and overhears a very unhappy customer. Iris thinks this might be her gal based on women's intuition and stakes out her place of work. Her partner tells her that this lady, Miss Caroline Evers, is a billionaire and a business tycoon and probably not the murderer. But Iris isn't so sure. Once Evers leaves her building, she follows her, and they eventually end up at the subway line where all the murders have taken place. Turns out Iris was right about Miss Evers, but now she gets to be the next victim. Now, why is this chick engaging in the GTA tried and true? Well, it's 'cause she's jealous. Basically, Carolyn Evers got most of her female organs replaced, so she could avoid gender discrimination in the workplace and rise to the rank of CEO. And it worked, but her husband starts cheating on her with natural women because, nothing beats the real thing. Hence why she's killing prostitutes and removing their organs. Her confession to Iris is just long enough for the AD Police to arrive to kill this chick. They're not going to arrest her because at this point her body is 70% boomer, which means they have to treat her like a boomer, and that means it's on site. They decide chasing her is too much effort, so they just blow up the subway tracks, and that's that for the girl boss. After the case is finished, Iris shows up for her eye surgery. It seems the cycle will continue. Iris is throwing away a piece of her humanity for the sake of her job. Oh, her name is Iris and she's replacing an I. It's like she really is losing a part of who she is. Forget it, it's not that smart. Episode 3 is The Man Who Bites His Tongue. And get this, it's about a man who bites his tongue. The man is named Billy, and I probably shouldn't be calling him a man because he kind of isn't anymore. No, not like that. No, well, how base do you want to be? The guy was a boxer turned cop, turned cyborg after a boomer went ballistic on him. The medical community seized the opportunity to create the 6 million yen man. Pretty much his whole body got thrown in the bin. The only thing that docs could save were his brains and his tongue, which were transplanted into an experimental battle cyborg body and sent to the front lines to rip and tear for the boys in blue. I know, what could possibly go wrong? Well, it turns out Billy's brain is having sad boy thoughts, and his only outlet to feel something is biting his tongue, or killing stuff. And when the head doctor in charge decides to pump even more drugs into this guy to numb the naughty thoughts, he does some very bad things. The AD police are tasked with taking him down, but as usual, they keep dying on the job. Eugenia is able to stop Billy, but she doesn't feel too great about it because 1, she and Billy used to be an item back when he had a body, and 2, she has that cybernetic arm, and she can't help but think that maybe she'll go crazy like Billy too one day. Does that ever happen? We'll never find out because the OVA series got canceled due to that whole Umex lawsuit situation. And it's a real shame because the series does a lot of things right. The biggest compliment I can think of is that it made the original OVA even better in my opinion. One of my big complaints with Bubblegum Crisis was how it was a cyberpunk anime, but it didn't really feel like it at times. I mean, the city looked right, but the people just looked like people from the 80s in terms of fashion and accessories. When Lena would call Nene Little Miss Cyberpunk, I'd just be scratching my head because she didn't really look that cyberpunk to me. I mean, she's got pink hair, but like, this is anime. It's not exactly out of the ordinary. But in AD Police Files, you get plenty of people with weird cybernetics and wires all over the place. The main chick even has a metal arm. I mean, that's the kind of stuff I wanted to see in the main series, so I'm happy we at least got to see it here. I mean, yeah, Crash also did do that, but you know, Crash is mid, so. This one? Not at all. The animation is just slightly worse than the original at its best, but maybe reverse that for the soundtrack.
What a fool I am. What a fool I've been.
The writing, I'd argue, is better too, although it's a lot more, extreme. This series is pretty sexual. Now look, BGC had some stuff too, but it was more like a couple of jokes here and there, maybe some fan service when the girls suit up, you know, like the normal sexual stuff. But in AD Police Files, it ain't normal. Alright, what do I mean? Well, in the first episode, you have one chick who gets off to getting shot, and then another chick who gets off to other people getting shot. You know, now that I think about it, she's a cop, I wonder how common that is in the real world. Could explain a few things. Then in episode 2, you have some aggressive/depressing masturbation, and the main villain running on a train to get a train run on her just before she bites it. And finally, in episode 3, the main doctor lady constantly has sex with Billy to keep his mind at ease. At least I think this is what sex is, I don't know. My Catholic school didn't do sex ed. The point being, the writer's barely disguised fetish appears in every episode. And it's pretty disappointing because most of the ideas the show tackles are heavy topics that should be covered. I mean, a woman cutting out the parts of herself that define her as a woman in order to chase material success in a cruel corporate world, only to realize too late she threw away her one chance at true happiness and now just feels helpless, isolated, and objectified? That's something that should be explored. But when you package it with stuff like this, it loses a lot of impact. It makes it feel edgy instead of adult or mature or whatever word you want to use. Now I know what you're thinking. Does that mean AD Police is Edgy Shlock? Well, let's consult the wholesome edgy chart. Now, in my opinion, BGC doesn't quite make it into the Edgy Shlock section. I would posit that the original OVA is the not often seen true schlock. Kinda cheesy, a little campy, somewhat violent and ecchi at times, a serviceable story that's not really the main draw, and an overall experience that is fun, comedic, and filled with heart. AD Police, on the other hand, is somewhere over here. It's not that sexual, so it doesn't fit over there, and it's kind of gory, but not as gratuitous as most things over here, so that's not where it belongs either. But it's definitely not here. And is that a problem? I don't think so. Especially since the AD Police sections of Bubblegum Crisis more or less feel the same as this show. Yeah, there are a few times where it's a bit much, but I can live with it. I mean, I'd rather have a show that swings and misses instead of a show that's too scared to swing. I like the darker tone and the more violent visuals, so if a handful of out-of-touch horny scenes is the price I have to pay to get those things, so be it. Also, I just really like that this is a prequel. I mean, I like prequels in general, especially the kind of prequel that understands we already know how the story ends. Make me fall in love with the characters I know can't win. AD Police does that, or at least it was in the process of doing that. Let me explain. We get to see a much less confident Leon who's just starting out as an AD police officer, and a new chick who is Leon's senior and love interest and isn't in the original series. The question on everyone's mind is, why? And based on the 3 episodes we got, it seems like the show was building to a tragic finale where I believe Leon would have killed Gina. The first episode makes a clear parallel between Gina and the various rogue female boomers. Episode 2 has a woman who has already replaced most of her body with cybernetic parts and gets put down like a boomer by the AD Police, as well as another woman who goes through with a cybernetic surgery even after witnessing the damage it could do firsthand. And then the final episode has Gina questioning if she may lose herself like Billy did, and maybe die in the same way too. This show started with Leon shooting a female boomer. I think it was going to end with him shooting one too. And I would have loved to have seen it because it would have made his character in the original Bubblegum Crisis even better. Knowing that behind all the quips and reckless acts of bravery was a jaded man who already lost so much, but remained steadfast in his mission to stop Genom and its city from taking away any more of the people he loved, that would have been great. But it's all just fanfic at this point because of the cancellation. If you're like me and you actually liked AD Police Files, which, might be a hot take, I don't know, my anime list ratings tend to be whack, to be honest, definitely check out the AD Police manga. It actually came out a couple years before the AD Police OVA, and it takes place in between episodes 1 and 2. I'm not going to go in depth with it because this video's too long anyways, but it's similar in style and tone to the OVA, maybe with less weird sexual stuff, but with plenty of the normal sexual stuff. Now there are some interesting world-building tidbits that, to my knowledge, are only discussed there. Stuff like the earthquake that wrecked Tokyo possibly being caused by Genom, or that Genom's CEO might actually be some kind of immortal or something. You get more of Suzuki's philosophical ramblings too, and it's actually kind of interesting. At one point there's a boomer that thinks he's the second coming of Christ because his brain doesn't have the limiter on it like other boomers, but one of his disciples starts talking about the soul and evolution and how humanity hasn't fully realized its own potential, so how could it create something that could be God? Half of it reads like a schizo thread, but I enjoyed it. The manga also does a really good thing with its characters. It has all these scenes with Leon and Gina and the other members of the AD Police that really flesh everybody out. Also, the art goes pretty hard. Definitely check it out. But now we've come to the end of the Artmic era. The Bubblegum franchise was put under indefinitely due to legal pressure from Umex. One thing I want to make clear though is that the lawsuit over Bubblegum Crisis didn't kill Artmic. While this lawsuit was still ongoing, something else happened in the background. The true Bubblegum Crisis. The Japanese asset price bubble. It finally burst and the economy crashed. The bubble burst had major long-term ramifications for all of Japan. The simple version is that people had less money to throw around. That goes for the common man and the corporation. This was a major problem for Artmic because its whole model depended on backing from record labels who now weren't willing to sponsor any more OVA. There had always been some risk investing in an original story, but back in the 80s, these companies had plenty of cash to offset the risk, and a large portion of anime fans had already spread the word that some of these OVA are well worth the price. That all came to an end in the 90s. Not so much from the people's side, they were still willing to throw away their life savings for 2D girls, but the record labels were out. Artmic did manage to put out a few more OVA, but the quality took a noticeable nosedive. And now we come to the conclusion I spoiled like 20 minutes ago. Artmic declared bankruptcy and dissolved in 1997. There was a bidding war for all of Artmic's assets and intellectual property. That's when AIC shows up. They're an animation studio that frequently worked with Artmic on various projects. They paid off its debts, absorbed the company, and immediately began production on a new Bubblegum Crisis anime. But rather than go the OVA route, AIC opted for the TV approach. This new Bubblegum Crisis would be a 26-episode reimagining of the old series. Some of the old Artmic crew were brought over, like Hiroki Hayashi, who would now direct, but unfortunately some of the goats like Kenichi Sonoda moved on to other things. However, Kiyaki Konaka was brought in to do the script. He had already done a similar cyberpunk series for AIC with Armitage 3, so he seemed the natural choice. He also wrote the script for Serial Experiments Lane, if you didn't know.
Why don't you shut up? Who the hell cares about any of that old crap anyway? Don't waste my time.
Things were looking pretty good on the production side, but then there was Suzuki, our golden boy who just couldn't let it go.
You're with him! You brought him here to kill me!
No!
Let her go!
Suzuki-san.
Suzuki-san.
Let her go!
The time had come. Early in the production of the new Bubblegum Crisis TV show, a group of Yakuza, led by Suzuki, approached the AIC headquarters in Tokyo. He demanded compensation for this new Bubblegum Crisis TV show, since it was all based on his work. They went around the building, threatening anyone they could to get their way, but Suzuki had overestimated his abilities. One of the employees had discreetly called the police. Once they showed up, it was over. The police arrested the Yakuza members, but Suzuki managed to escape. He used the money he had already made by illegally selling off Artmic assets and production artwork to fund his new life on the run. And just like that, he was gone. He was our golden boy. The one who was gonna make new anime, not steal them. Bring balance to the OVA market, not leave it in the Walmart bargain bin. You were an inspiration, Suzuki. We loved you. I did not make any of this up, by the way. The former president of Artmic, Toshimichi Suzuki, really did show up at the AIC office with a bunch of Yakuza to extort the company. He was in a lot of debt, went to many bad real estate investments. Now, there is one final part left in Suzuki's story, but I'm gonna save it for the end. For right now, let's talk about this new version of Bubblegum Crisis. Reboots are a tricky thing. What do you change? What do you cut? What do you add? How can you create something that satisfies all the old fans while it simultaneously appeals to potential new ones? Well, that's the neat part. You can't. But you can get pretty close. That's Bubblegum Crisis Tokyo 2040, a reboot with some amazing changes, understandable cuts, and very odd additions. There are times where the show blows the original out of the water, and then other times where I'm thinking, how did we get here? Well, here's how. Just like the title of the show says, it's 2040, and the Genom Corporation has essentially taken over Tokyo after a mysterious earthquake leveled the city 6 years prior. Sound familiar? Yeah, it's the same setup as before, but things play out differently this go-around. Lina Yamazaki has just arrived in the big city for her new job. She's on her way to the interview with one of her girlfriends, taking in the sights you don't get to see with all that green crap everywhere. That's better. The two grab a bite to eat, and Lena asks her friend if she's ever seen the Nightsabers in action. The answer is no, because according to the friend, they don't exist. It's not just gossip and fake news being circulated online by edgy 12-year-olds with frog profile pictures. If the screen people don't talk about it, then it never happened. Plus, there isn't any photographic evidence of these Nightsabers anyway, so they can't possibly be real. While the friend talks about how weird and creepy boomers are, Lena nearly gets hit by a driver who, of course, is female. Lena's very upset by this because she dropped her food and got a scratch on that pretty face. But the motorcyclist doesn't say anything. She just flashes some gang signs and speeds away. Lena chases her down and she even breaks a heel, but got nothing to show for it. And when she gets to her job, she's berated by her boomer boss for her tardiness and unkempt appearance. Then a coworker spots her cleaning up one of the restrooms and offers to give her a private tour of Tokyo since she's new in town. Somehow, she says yes to this. Okay, workplace bathroom, I will add that to the list. He takes her to a little district called Sada, named after that place famous for inhospitality. Shockingly enough, the date doesn't go too well. The guy was all hands, no riz.
You ought to be more careful with a pretty face like that.
Okay.
Plessa, Boomer shows up and the guy just dipped out immediately, leaving Lena all on her own. Leon and Daly of the AD Police race on over to the scene, but two girls in hard suits show up first. One fights off the dragon and the other rescues the princess. The next day, Lena gives her boss a facial and then goes to the club that Priss performs at. Now, how did she know that Priss was one of the Night Sabers? Well, she kept seeing Priss everywhere and realized that that was the chick who nearly hit her. And then during the Boomer fight, the blue Night Saber made the same hand gesture from before. Also, Nene screamed her name out like an idiot.
Way to go, Priss!
Lena demands that Priss let her on the team. The 9 to 5 just ain't for her. Priss doesn't give her an answer, but she goes to a ritzy clothing store / aquarium to talk shop with the leader of the Night Sabers, Celia. She claims she's only there to pick up her paycheck, but she asks if Celia could maybe make another suit? Fighting boomers is tough work after all, and it might be time to add another member to the team, especially because the most recent addition, Nene, kinda sucks. Speaking of sucking, Leon and Daly get chewed out for being slightly less incompetent than the average AD police officer. The chief reminds them that they aren't supposed to get involved with the Night Sabers since they seem to be human, and that means they technically fall under the jurisdiction of the normal police. But Leon isn't so sure that they aren't boomers, and uses that as an excuse to keep investigating them. Meanwhile, the CEO of Genom, Quincy Rosenkreutz, is making moves to take control of the world's energy industry, so that Genom can expand its control over the international markets. Rosenkreutz, huh? I mean, okay, sure, fine, yeah, Christian mysticism, that's cool. To be honest, I was kind of hoping for...
Meth? It means death in Hebrew.
Ah, there we go. Rosenkreutz ain't doing all this purely for financial gain, though. He's driven by something else, a love for technology and a desire for a synthesis between man and machine. Back to Lena. She's been trying to infiltrate the Night Sabers on her own since Priss never got back to her. She attempts to hack into the AD Police servers to see what they've got, but Nene sends her packing. So she tracks down Priss by asking the club manager of her preferred venue where she might be. The talk isn't much of a talk, and she's still not able to join the Night Sabers yet. After some mild teasing, Priss just takes off.
Hey, one momentita, señorita. We still haven't worked out a bridge for that new song yet.
But it's actually just a test, one Lena passes by pursuing. The chase leads her to Celia's boutique, where she stumbles her way into the Night Saber's secret hideout. They've been expecting her, and they're willing to give her a shot. Celia throws her into a simulation of one of Priss' boomer battles to see if she can handle the mental stress and physical strain that comes with wearing the hard suits. Turns out she can't, but she's got potential. So Celia gets her full-time mechanic, part-time boyfriend Nigel, to whip up a new suit. He's an ex-Genom engineer who's been working with Celia since the beginning. Once the new suit is finished, Lena puts it on for a tutorial that turns into a rescue op. Priss is pinned down in a restaurant without her suit, so it's up to Lena and Nene to save the day.
Here goes nothing!
They don't. But they do buy enough time for Priss to suit up and put down the boomer herself. Leon and Daly try to arrest the Night Sabers, but the rest of the AD police show up guns blazing, which allows the girls to escape. Once the dust is settled, Lena goes over to Priss' place to talk about what happened. Priss wasn't very happy with Lena's performance, and Lena even less so, but she's committed to the cause. That fight with the rogue boomer in the restaurant terrified her. She really thought she was gonna bite it then and there, but it wasn't just fear she felt at that moment. She also felt excitement. Lena is now officially a Night Saber, alongside Priss, Nene, and Celia. And I guess Nigel, too. Oh yeah, and the butler. I completely forgot to mention Celia's butler. And she has her brother Maki, who takes a little while to show up, but when he does, he surprises Celia, and especially the aforementioned butler. He's a bit of a weirdo and kind of wimpy, but at the same time, pretty smart and skilled with machines, and...
You really know how to communicate with machines, don't you?
Wait a minute, I know that voice. Spike Spencer, voice of Shinji Ikari. Oh my god, Celia, get out. Maki is a mystery, one that only Celia knows the truth about, but she elects to keep such information to herself, for the time being. There's actually a few things she's been hiding from the group. First off, her dad made the boomers. Second, the big earthquake that toppled Tokyo some years back, he kinda caused that too. Genom wanted to hide all evidence of his last and greatest invention, Galatea, a being created from the DNA of Celia's stingray and molded into the
ultimate life form.
She's got cybernetic abilities and can control every boomer in Tokyo with ease. Also, she's a naked lolly, and I don't really know if I should be censoring anything because, I mean, technically there's nothing there, and also when I try to censor it, it just kind of makes it look worse. Celia's main objective is to find her father's old lab to destroy Galatea, who's been in stasis ever since the earthquake. No one knows exactly where the lab is, but Mason has been doing some digging around the city using robotic worms. Not the most effective method, but sooner or later, he will find what he's looking for. Cecilia goes to Chinatown to seek an old pervert for advice.
The doc's old, but he won't pass up a chance to get a closer look at you.
Thanks, I think.
He tells her that he can help since he's actually just recently reconstructed the aftermath of the earthquake and now has the most accurate map of Tokyo's underground. Fortune seems to favor her too, since the Night Sabers recently ran into a synthetic creature that could detect boomers up to 300 meters away. Using that tech alongside the map, Celia no longer needs to search all of Tokyo, just a few dozen locations. But Mason always knew that Celia would find the place first. That's why he's been feeding her choice information through an informant who works for him. He knows her every move, and he's just waiting for her to unknowingly lead him right to the secret lab, which is exactly what happens. There's a standoff between him and the Night Sabers, but he comes out on top once Galatea comes out of stasis and wrecks their suits along with all the other boomers in the room. In case you don't catch what I'm saying, the hard suits are boomers. They've just been remodified by Nigel. Priss ditches her suit to chase down Mason and Galatea, but she's too late and they're long gone. She does run into Leon, who now has solid confirmation she's one of the Night Sabers, but he's there off duty, so he doesn't report any of this to the AD Police. The other members of the Night Sabers had no idea about Galatea, or that Celia had been using them all to find her father's secret lab so she could blow everything up. So when they do find out the truth, they feel a little hurt. It also bothers them that Celia never mentioned the full team of ladies just like him that died fighting boomers not that long ago. We also find out Maki isn't really Celia's brother. He's another invention of Celia's father, a failed prototype for what would become the boomers. Unlike Galatea, Maki was too close to a human being, and therefore abandoned. He's got some sad boy thoughts now concerning what he is, but Nene's there to keep his spirits up.
Stupid kid. I wish he wasn't so much younger than me.
Celia, on the other hand, is still schizo, although, maybe she's doing pretty well considering that two fake people were grown in her head when she was just a little girl. That and her father actually sacrificed her mother to bypass any potential compatibility problems. Her having all those mental breakdowns now makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Damn it! Boomers are safe! Are you out of your minds? Boomers are a threat to everyone on the planet!
Luckily, the girls are able to work out their differences, and they kinda have to because Genom is still up to no good. And by Genom, I actually just mean Mason. He may be Quincy's top guy, but at the same time, he's been going behind the CEO's back to pursue his own project. One that will see him transform into a boomer-human hybrid, godlike being thing.
But what kind of god? That's the question. Not a weak, pathetic god who simply sits back and watches, but a god who passes judgment. A god who corrects the mistakes of 1,000,000 years of evolution.
He uses Galatea to finally take out his boss and start the dimensional merge. Now, the thing about Mason is that he really doesn't like humanity. They're dirty and disgusting and dated. And that's why he tried to turn himself into a boomer when he was younger, but his body just absorbed all the boomer gobbledygook. Ever since that day, he's been searching for some way to make the transition from man to machine, and he believes Galatea to be the answer to his plight. Unfortunately, she just finds him disgusting and says some very not nice things.
You will never be one of us.
Instead of turning him into a boomer, she turns him into a decoration. While Galatea terrorizes the city, Nigel and Maki manage to make some new suits for the Night Sabers. They're made of a different material that should be more resistant to Galatea's technomancy. They're also stronger, lighter, and kinkier than before because, what did you expect? I said Shinji worked on it. Alright, we're in the final stretch now. Galatea grows up and glows up, and everyone in Tokyo is evacuated. The Antichrist is going to let the US nuke Japan, so the Night Sabers have to defeat Galatea as quickly as possible. They don't, and she merges with Genom Tower and turns it into a spaceship and, flies off into space. Okay. The nukes are dropped, but Galatea just absorbs them and takes over a Genom satellite system that controls all the technology in the world. Things look pretty bad, but the Nightsabers haven't given up yet. Nigel boosts the stats of Priss' favorite motorcycle, and she's able to board a space shuttle with Lena and Nene. Celia stayed behind because that last fight kinda broke her. Once in space, the three Nightsabers start blowing stuff up, but even with all their upgrades, they never stood a chance. Lena and Nene are sent crashing down to Earth, while Priss gets thrown into a hentai. She's able to break free thanks to her motorcycle gaining sentience, and together they end Galatea once and for all, both physically and philosophically.
I'm sorry it had to come to this.
Lena and Nene manage to make it through the atmosphere all right. One of the perks of their new suits is that they can change it with their mind. So one turns into like a bird-looking thing, and the other one like a dolphin, I think. They crash land on some island with their suits completely destroyed, and that's that for their story. Priss has a similar experience. She also crashes down in the middle of nowhere, completely unscathed because Galatea wasn't about to let Best Girl die. Yes, I am aware that she's naked in the desert with no food or water in sight. However, and that's the ending. I'm not joking. It ends with 3 of the 4 Nightsabers stuck in the wilderness with no clothes, no hard suits, no nothing. Is there a final reunion with Leon and Daly? An update on Genom? A return to Tokyo maybe?
Not this time.
Oh wait, I get it. That's gonna be covered in the sequel series. Alright, should be out any day now. 2040 is not Bubblegum Crisis, but it's not bad. In fact, I'd say it's the better show. With the first half of the show in particular, I felt like it was tailor-made to address every critique I had concerning the OVA. We see more boomers out in public and signs that Tokyo has turned into a cyberpunk dystopia, and we see all of that stuff through the eyes of the least utilized main character from the OVA, Lena. Not only is this a neat narrative trick to allow for unintrusive exposition, it also lets Lena actually be a real character with a real motivation for doing the things she does. And sometimes her characterization or motivation for being a Nightsaber puts her at odds with other members of the group, which was exactly what I wish the OVA did. I didn't like how all the OVA's characters got along all the time, especially when many of them seemed to have conflicting personality traits and goals. Why didn't the hot-headed Priss constantly explode on the stoic Celia? Why didn't Celia ever get onto Lena for constantly getting involved with other guys? Why didn't Nene ever get any flack from the rest of the group for being an AD police officer? Priss even states she hates them in the very first episode, but it's never a point of contention between them. That's the kind of stuff I wanted to see, and 2040 actually has it.
God, you're a moron.
Priss has a low opinion of Nene and strongly encourages Celia to take her off the team, until halfway through the series once Nene finally proves herself in combat. And Priss gets to make these kinds of requests because she's the heavy hitter and the most senior member of the Nightsabers besides Celia. Lena's acceptance into the group shakes up the existing dynamic. Priss actually likes her and sees a bit of herself in her, but Lena only sees her as a rival who won't give her the time of day. Then there's the cute little relationship between Nene and Lena. Nene is the one who looks after Lena the most, giving her all this advice, showing her the ropes, building up her confidence, and acting like her older sister despite being younger and shorter. And then you have Celia, who just feels different from the rest. She's mysterious and volatile. You never quite know what she's thinking while she issues orders from behind the battlefield. I absolutely love the way the main characters are written. They all have unique personalities that play off each other wonderfully, and the internal conflicts feel natural and not melodramatic. The only thing is, they aren't really the same characters as before. I mean, just look at them. They all have a different hairstyle and/or hair color, and most of them have a different personality too. Let's start with Priss. In the OVA, she was a hot-headed punk with a softer side that sometimes came out. But in 2040, she's a calmer, colder kind of person, very distant from everyone she interacts with, be that her band or even the other Nightsabers. She even starts out living alone in the outskirts of Tokyo instead of being roomies with Lena like in the OVA, and only moving to the junkyard after Sylvie dies. But as for Lena, the only thing she shares in common with her OVA counterpart is that, They both worked a corporate job at one point. Nene, on the other hand, is basically the same character, but with short blonde hair instead of longer pink hair. Why did they even bother to make such a small change? Is this a difference just for the sake of having a difference? Maybe, but I think it might have to do with Cilia. She got the reverse Nene treatment, now sporting longer hair of an unnatural color. A change that better fits with the whole fashionista boutique owner vibe she's got going on. And the whitish blue hair really sets her apart from the rest and makes her seem, I don't know, angelic or above them. If Nene had the pink hair again, it would probably take away from that, at least I think. As for these redesigns, I actually really like them. They're very 90s, which is already pretty cool, but I also just think they fit these characters better than the OVA's designs fit its characters. But at the same time, there's just something about Sonoda's art that sets it apart. I don't know what it is exactly, but his designs are like equal parts cool and cute. It's just got this aura, you know? But as for the characters themselves, which version do I prefer? Well, I mean, that should be pretty obvious based on how much praise I've given the character writing in 2040, but yeah, it's that one. But it's not like I prefer every character from 2040 over their OVA counterpart. For Lena, Cilia, and Nene, no contest, 2040 has the better versions. But with Priss, it's actually a tougher call. She is the highlight of the OVA, and I completely understand why fans were so against her rumored removal. Unfortunately, the magic kinda left with Oomori, so the Priss of Crash left a bad taste in my mouth. 2040, however, has a consistently peak Priss. Now at this point, I should probably make it clear that I decided to watch 2040 dubbed. I did this mostly just to help my brain disassociate the OVA timeline from the 2040 timeline, and let me tell you, the English dub is pretty good.
This isn't the police, it's a kindergarten. God help us.
Hi, guys!
Great. Why is she here? No, don't tell me.
And by far the best part of the dub is Christine Otten's performance as Priss.
Join what?
You know!
The band?
Of course not! You know what!
Biker gang.
Look, I'm serious! Stop playing with me!
Am I?
Spare coochie, ma'am.
It was actually her first time doing a main role, and she knocked it out of the park. She even went above and beyond the Call of Duty for this role. Christine Otten personally translated all the songs that Priss sang in 2040, usually before she was up to record her lines for the day. Sometimes she only had a handful of hours to work with, and props to her for singing all the songs herself despite not actually being a singer. How does she sound? Well, I mean, I guess that depends on your taste. Now, if you think she sounds bad, I've got news for you. This was the 90s. They all sounded bad. What I'm saying is that both Prisses are great, but I must only choose one. Who will it be? The girl who smokes a pack a day, or the girl who showers once a month? You know, I always had a great respect for Napoleon, but it wasn't until recently that I realized just how real he could be.
I'm sorry, Priss, but you did lose our bet. Besides, you look so pretty in pink.
To save some time, I'll say that I generally prefer the 2040 versions of the shared characters from the OVA, but some are more preferred than others. Like Maki is way better in 2040, and Daily is also an improvement, but Leon might be a little better in the OVA. Now this version of Leon does hate the Nightsabers at the start, unlike OVA Leon, who went out of his way to help them whenever he could, which does put more tension between him and Priss and their romance subplot, but that all gets resolved before anything interesting happens. Plus, I don't think it really added anything to their dynamic anyways. But speaking of interesting, there's Nigel. The guy himself isn't too interesting. He's a former Gundam engineer who worked on Boomers with Celia's dad, which is certainly something, but he mostly just works on the Nightsaber's heart suits and grunts 50 different ways. What's interesting to me though is that this guy is basically a reimagined version of a throwaway character from episode 4 of the OVA. He represents something I think the show does wonderfully. It knows how to take concepts and characters from the original OVA and expand on them. There's a bigger focus on the Boomers and their impact on society, as well as our understanding of who counts as people. There's more time dedicated to fleshing out Mason, Quincy, and all of Gundam and its city. I thought it was really cool to find out the reason the AD Police suck so bad at their job is because Gundam basically pays them to be bad. I also love that Maki actually has a purpose in the story now, beyond indicating imminent fan service. And remember how Lena's suit had the sci-fi steel slicing ribbon thing, unlike the other ones? Well, 2040 decided that was because her suit was the newest one, and a prototype for what would eventually become the more malleable Mark II version. And you know how OVA Celia sometimes wears a suit and sometimes doesn't for no real reason? Well, in 2040 she wants to wear it, but usually can't because of a combination of past trauma and the suits being boomers created with technology based on her brain. It can shock her system, which I guess would be bad. And since we're talking about the suits, I might as well mention how Nene's suit is now the only one that shoots those needle things which hack into the boomers' firmware, and Priss's suit is the melee-focused one because she's literally the heavy hitter. It's like each character's suit is more than just battle armor now, it's an extension of who they are. Then there's the internal struggle at Genom, Quincy versus Mason. In the OVA, Quincy was just a guy who cared about money and power, and Mason was a cutthroat executive turned weird false robot messiah for some reason. I wish 2040 leaned more into Quincy instead of just having him be stuck at Genom HQ, monologuing from his gamer pad, but I do enjoy how he played off Mason. Quincy views boomers as the answer to human suffering. They can replace the slave class of society and allow human beings to live comfortable lives in a perfect world. Quincy claims that he loves them, but to him, boomers will always be inferior to humanity. They are the new untouchables, which is exactly why Quincy clings on to his life in the way that he does, instead of augmenting himself with boomer tech. But see, Mason is the exact opposite. He doesn't want to end human suffering, he wants to end human beings. He is infatuated with boomers, but his love for them is perverted and sick. To him, humanity is the true untouchable class, and anything that has humanity's stench on it is less than trash. They both crave to be a god, and that's why they both went against each other in the end. You see, all of these things are cool additions that give more substance to the stuff on screen. But not every expansion on the OVA was for the better. I'm mostly talking about the boomers. The boomers in 2040 are very different from the boomers in the OVA. They tend to look more robotic on the surface and become more monstrous when they go berserk. At first, I was on board for this new style of boomer. There are a lot of well-done creepy scenes with these guys that tend to come after someone's either abused them or alters them in some way. But once Galatia takes over, they basically just act like zombies, and it's less interesting to me. Plus, the designs get pretty out there at times. With the OVAs, the boomers acted more like people. I mean, half the time they disguised themselves as human, and you wouldn't know they were boomers until you landed a punch. And even though they often transformed into massive unholy abominations, they never felt like the zombies from 2040. I do appreciate that we finally got to see the grand boomer plan of replacing humanity with robots, but I can't help but feel like the older canon had more interesting false messiahs. There's nothing wrong with Galatia per se, but I'll be honest, I wasn't too fond of the whole space section. It felt very out of place and reminded me of things I don't want to be reminded of. Then there's the ending. 2040 continued the tradition of having a very unsatisfying conclusion, but this time they don't even have the cancellation excuse. It is baffling to me how 3 of the 4 Nightsabers end the series stripped and stranded. I mentioned it earlier, but there were plans for a sequel. It's just that production never took off because most of the key staff got themselves involved in other projects. We don't know much about that sequel other than the name, though it probably would have had Mason resurrect as Largo like he did in the OVA, since that's the biggest thing from the OVA, not in 2040. And I do believe that the Largo stuff would have been handled better this go around, just based on how they handled most of the other stuff. But why didn't that happen? Why didn't AIC immediately start work on a sequel? Well, that's because 2040 didn't meet expectations. AIC's or the fans. And not everyone appreciated the emphasis on characters and mystery over action and music. See, the OVA just went straight into things, whereas the show takes some time to realign. I wouldn't call it slow, but other people do. Again, I need to reiterate something. It wasn't like Bubblegum Crisis was praised for its amazing story and brilliant character writing. I mean, the origin for the Nightsabers isn't even in the OVA. It's covered elsewhere at a 3-minute music video. Bubblegum Crisis was action-packed, simple fun with cool robots and pretty girls. I think Michael Bay would have nailed the live-action adaptation. But I'm not sure if the slower pace is the main issue here. I think it has to do more with the presentation. 2040 is a pretty good looking show, and usually when you have a TV version of an older OVA, the visuals tend to suffer. Not so much here. The fights are still fluid and the backdrops go hard, and the characters are pretty well animated. As far as 90s TV anime go, this one looks better than most, but does it look like Bubblegum Crisis? Does it feel like Bubblegum Crisis? Gone are the designs by Kenichi Sonoda, and the OST, while great, doesn't have that 80s synth rock anymore. It's not just the writing and the characters and the plot that are different, it's the whole vibe that changed. Bubblegum Crisis was a product of the 80s. Terminator, Blade Runner, RoboCop, all of these movies were big hits in Japan, and it's not difficult to see the echoes of these films in Bubblegum Crisis. Probably the biggest influence was Streets of Fire, an action crime, neo-noir, rock opera box office failure that the Japanese went crazy for, apparently.
This is not the Bayside.
There's something back in Richmond I gotta take care of.
What are you talking about?
Now when you take all of these things and add Sonoda's designs along with the music, you get something that feels like its own thing, even if it's not hard to see each inspiration. 2040 ditches most of these elements. You can see that in the backgrounds, and the designs, and the music choice, and in the fact that Priss never sings a full song. It's no longer a musically charged mashup of all the best action-related things from the 80s. It's a 90s sci-fi show. I may like the characters more in 2040, designs and all. I may think the story is more coherent and satisfying, even if the ending is still pretty disappointing. But when you say Bubblegum Crisis, I'm not gonna be thinking of 2040. But look, that's mainly the opinion of C-Koreans from the 90s. If you were to ask a friend of Freedom from the early 2000s, you'd probably get a different answer. And that may in large part be a result of the fantastic English dub, a certified ADV classic. You know, something pretty cheesy, but filled with passion.
Where's the camera?
Oh, it's a live feed from an NSA spy satellite.
That's 30 years.
I think everyone did a pretty solid job in this one, but, you know, that's all subjective. If you don't like dubs, this probably won't change your mind, but if you do, then definitely check it out. Maybe also check out the DVD commentaries. They're very informative.
Hi, I'm Matt Greenfield. I was the ADR writer and director for the English language version of Bubblegum Crisis Tokyo 2040.
Liar.
Turn around and get
I'm urinating on myself in submission.
How many 17-year-olds have you done now?
I think I'm on, literally, I think I'm on my 9th.
Voiceovers, Chris.
I'm just trying to teach you the ropes of how to make a indestructible android suit or something.
I think he's actually copying a feel.
That's what I think. He's showing me how to please a woman, apparently.
Why did you feel that you were cast in this part?
Thanks, Matt. I guess I sound...
no one else available, right?
Well, there was that, and of course, I guess I sound like a smart-ass homosexual policeman.
Lovely. When you watch this show, you can just tell everyone involved had a lot of fun with this one, which I believe is key to making a good English dub. Now, I hate to praise women more than I have to, but I once again have to simp for Christine Houghton. I mean, she must have really liked playing Priss. She's out there doing a bunch of research on anime forums to figure out how to give the best performance for the character that she can. I really respect that, and it makes me just like her version of Priss that much more.
As soon as I got Bubblegum, I just went intensive into studying what this is, what the phenomena is, what it's about, the fans, what they like. I frequently go to the boards and to the forums to get ideas about what people are thinking about shows and what shows they like, what characters they like. And so my thoughts about anime have changed simply because I know about it now, and I have become a huge fan. Where I first started out not knowing quite what to think about her, by the end of it, I was completely in love with her. I completely loved this woman, and she'll be with me for the rest of my life.
2040 sold pretty well in America from what I can tell. I mean, if it didn't, I don't know why ADV made a DVD remaster 5 years after the initial release. A remaster that came to America before Japan, mind you. Now sure, the show still had its detractors over here too, but most Western weebs wanted a sequel. Unfortunately though, ADV and AIC couldn't work anything out. And then ADV went bankrupt and the whole sequel idea went down with the company. But while 2040 didn't get a sequel, it did get a prequel, AD Police, to Protect and Serve. I'm just gonna call it TV Police. TV Police was gonna do exactly what 2040 did with BGC, but for the AD Police OVA. It would take the world of AD Police files and flesh it out some more. You know, add some interesting characters, a completed storyline, and just give it the 90s touch. The final product would be something that surpassed the original. But did that happen? Sasaki Kenji is a lone wolf type who can handle himself in any fight but always gets his partner hurt in the process. During a routine protect and serve operation, Kenji's partner gets mogged by a machine and put in a coma. His new partner is a kraut named Cleef, Hans Cleef, a former normal police officer from Deutschland who just recently transferred to Japan after an accident left some shrapnel stuck in his brain. This wiped out most of his memories, but he still knows what the ladies like. What he doesn't know is that he's actually a biologically fused boomer, a science experiment for the dying chairman of the Genom Corporation, who's looking to swap himself out for a younger model. This show is pretty episodic, so I'll spare you the play-by-play, but the main thing is that there's this ne'er-do-well named Liam Fletcher, who's a part of a crime syndicate that's creating illegal boomers. And this pack of police pigs have to track him and his cohorts down to save the city. On the case are Kenji Hans, Mary Mallon, Karen Jordan, Jose Collins, the Sergeant Hideaki Kurata, and the section manager Nancy Wilson. We got random acts of crime, conspiracies galore, and a few friends that end up fatalities. Pretty run-of-the-mill police stuff, but the investigation starts to get a little messy once Hans starts getting his memories back, and it gets even more messy once he nearly dies in the line of duty. He recovers almost immediately, and Genom is hiding anything that had his blood on it, which causes Kenji to start asking too many questions and end up with an answer he's not too thrilled about. Hans isn't thrilled either. Once he finds out he's not a real human being, he goes a little bonkers.
He's got AIDS!
Also, that one ne'er-do-well I mentioned earlier, Liam Fletcher, he's also a biologically fused boomer, but a very incomplete version that struggles with identity. Hans was created as his better version, but even still, all the kinks weren't worked out just yet, hence the going bonkers. The chairman expected this to happen, which is why he had a final perfected Hans built using the data from the one we've been spending time with. He nearly gets away with it too, but Hans is able to buy Kenji enough time to kill them both and put an end to this boomer-human hybrid business. The case is closed, but the details are never made public, since Genom has the final say concerning what gets published in the papers. The AD Police hold a funeral for Hans, and then get right back to it.
AD Police と呼んだ。
TV Police is a typical police show, but with robots. We've got the loose cannon detective, a new partner he doesn't like, some bonding on the job, a conspiracy that goes straight to the top, and a tragic death just as the two finally come to understand one another. If you've seen any other cop-related show or movie, then you've seen this one. That's not a terrible thing on its own. I'd rather a story do things by the book than subvert expectations for the sake of subverting expectations. But TV Police is, if I had to describe it in a single word, then I'd ask for two and say, wasted opportunity. It doesn't add anything to Bubblegum Crisis, the TV version, or the franchise at large. In fact, at times, I completely forgot this was set in the 2040 timeline. It takes place 5 years prior, so sure, things don't have to look exactly the same, but I don't know, it just doesn't seem like the same universe to me. And the lack of familiar faces only adds to this problem. Why have the Genom chairman be the ultimate big bad here? Why not Mason? Wouldn't he be more fitting, since his whole deal in 2040 was wanting to turn himself into a boomer? I mean, here's the thing. I actually thought he was the main villain up until the last episode. You see, in episode 3, the side boss of the show, Liam Fletcher, he mentions that his boss is Mason. It turns out it's a completely different Mason from, Mason. Actually, it's even worse than that, because this Mason is just Fletcher, but he's having memory issues from the whole boomer hybrid experiment thing. Why do this, exactly? I mean, just pick another name. Mason ain't that great. But honestly, just make Mason, Mason. This is a prequel, okay? Mason is around. Use him. But more importantly, or maybe just personally, why is Leon not here? If we're remaking Police Files, shouldn't he be the main character? Or I guess, you could make Daly the main character if you wanted to be more in line with how 2040 does things. I mean, I can't tell you how surprised I was to find out that these two on the cover weren't Leon and Daly. I mean, it's not like they had to be, but now I can't help but wonder where these guys were in the main series. Like, did they retire before things kicked off, or I don't know, die? It just sucks how disconnected this show feels from everything else. I really liked how AD Police Files actually added another layer to love to Bubblegum Crisis. The only problem was that it got canceled before it could tell the whole story. TV Police should have been the completed story. Maybe combine the stuff from the manga with the stuff from the OVA into a single series and sure, give it the 2040 touch for good measure. And I think 12 episodes is really all you need for something like this. You just can't waste any time on the wrong people or plot lines. You know, don't dedicate an entire episode to a glorified background character and kill him off in the very same episode.
Marked for death.
Instead, focus on the others who are actually not half bad when the show knows what to do with them. Case in point, episode 8. It's the best episode. By far, not even close. And it's a very simple episode set in a single location. The bar. Kenji's favorite bar, where he's drinking alone because he doesn't want to see his grandfather who's camped out at the police station, and all his teammates show up one at a time to get him to go see the old guy. Just like in the real world, nothing really happens here. Most of the episode is just a bunch of people standing around talking. But the tone is different. Things aren't exaggerated, no one's shouting at each other. It's all very mellow. It's because this episode doesn't have to shoe in a lackluster action set piece or some manufactured social tension that the characters get a chance to shine. Kenji is stubborn but sensible for once. Han shows off his mature side, and even Mary and Karen get some love. It's filled with all these little character-specific insights, like how Hans can recognize Mary's footsteps because he's a sleazy womanizer, or how Karen actually has a more feminine side to her despite appearances, or how Mary is a really nosy person, which is why she's already suspecting something is off about Hans. Then there's the comedy. Now, it's never laugh-out-loud hilarious, but this episode has the best grasp on setups, timing, and punchlines out of the bunch. The main characters keep coming in and leaving and coming back because Hans, Mary, and Karen are all avoiding each other for various petty reasons. It's funny just watching the bartender shuffle them all through different hiding spots until some rando decides to rob the place, only to be met with 4 cops all pointing some iron his way. And they don't even try to arrest him, they just go back to drinking. I love that. The main plot-related thing for this episode is that Hans is starting to suspect he's a biologically fused boomer with false memories, but his doctor/girlfriend who works for Genom is like, nah, don't worry about it. And he doesn't, for a little bit, but while he talks with Kenji and the others over the course of the episode, he starts messing around with all the puzzles at the bar, solving them almost instantly without even thinking about it. It's not until the end of the episode, once everyone has worked out all their differences and Kenji goes back to the station, that Hans looks down at his handiwork and gets freaked out. Now, to be honest, my enthusiasm for TV Police had already faded about halfway through the show, but this episode actually roped me back in. The episodes that came after weren't as good as this one, but I do still think the show went out on a high note, relatively speaking. All of these things lead me to believe that I should call TV Police bad. I mean, it is very average, and it wastes a lot of time and great ideas, but I can't bring myself to do it for some reason. I mean, it's mostly because old equals good, am I right? But aside from that, it's because of this episode. Also, I do actually love the faded aesthetic of the show. I do wish it leaned a little more into its punk style, but it is what it is. Now, don't get me wrong, what it is a crappy 90s anime. I mean, there's maybe like 2 good action scenes, and the rest is just, Banger opening, though. There's really no reason to watch TV Police, unless you're a completionist. It's not a complete waste of time, but I mean, you're not missing much if you choose to waste your time elsewhere. Maybe I'm too wrapped up thinking about what could have been to appreciate what we got, but I think the truth is, the show's just mid. Besides the soundtrack. It seems like most people didn't like this one either, but there are a few who do, and maybe that's you. As for me, I'd say this is the worst AD Police show. But the next one? Well, let's not spoil things just yet. The lackluster reception to 2040 and TV Police threw a wrench into AIC's plan for Bubblegum Crisis. Whether it was a prequel or a sequel, any new entry under the 2040 brand was doomed to fail in their eyes. So they let things sit for a minute to get a feel for what fans wanted most. And what fans wanted most was a return. Parasite Dolls is a 3-episode OVA set in the original Bubblegum Crisis timeline. Each episode is self-contained, but follows the same core members of a secret AD Police unit called Branch. It's an elite operation manned by the best and brightest who aren't able to protect and serve under the main AD Police outfit because of various circumstances. They specialize in detective work and cloak and dagger type missions, but occasionally they handle anything involving boomers if it seems serious enough. Here's the team. Lieutenant Buzz Nick Vest is a disgraced AD police officer and founding member of Branch. He doesn't mess around and he doesn't mince words, but he does kill kids. Just the one though, alright? It was an accident. He thought she was a boomer. It happens to the best of us.
Hey, watch it.
He has some unresolved issues surrounding the matter, and that's further complicated by how his wife was murdered by a rogue boomer 1 year prior to his unauthorized post-birth abortion. And it gets even worse for him because his partner, Rod Kimball, is also a boomer. A very well-mannered and respectable bucket of bolts with a mean right hook and a dry sense of humor. Then there's Reiko Michelson, a glory-hunting rookie who blows stuff up when she's not getting herself in trouble. And speaking of trouble, we have Bill Myers, a walking nightmare for HR, but the best dang hacker in the whole AD Police. And the last member of the team is Angel, the former flame of Buzz, who's currently undercover at Genom, keeping an eye on all their operations. Koji Takahashi, the inspector in charge of Branch, calls Buzz into the station on his day off to pick up some kind of package. Inside is a flash drive that appears to be encrypted, so Buzz heads over to Bill to have him crack the code. They find some random numbers, the name of a nightclub, and a time. Buzz believes this is related to his boomer drug investigation, an investigation Genom doesn't like, which is why they ask the head of the AD Police to discourage his course of action.
何かゲノムと取引でも?
ふざけるな! そんなことを AD ポリスがやっているなどと思うのか?
Buzz gets to the club and works his way to the meeting point in the bathroom. There he finds a dead man and the drugs that supposedly make boomers turn rogue. He's confronted by the boomer bouncer, who gets a couple good hits in, until Kimball shows up, which allows Buzz the opportunity to strike at the boomer's weak point. Together, they head to a cafe and figure out their next step. Kimball analyzes the drug, but finds out it doesn't drive boomers mad. It actually installs new files to fix defective software. This means that Genom knows some of its models are liable to go rogue, and now they're trying to fix the issue on the down low. They hack into Genom's network to track down the nearest potential rogue boomer based on the serial numbers from the package. Backing up a bit, Michelson has been busy since the morning too. There was a berserk boomer that was called in by Buzz for tweaking out on the highway. She flies on over there, but lingers at the crime scene to inspect the body, which has a weird signal coming from a chip that shouldn't be there. She goes back to base to rest for a moment, but has to fly out again to deal with yet another rogue boomer. This one flying a helicopter in the city. But rather than chase after the boomer, she follows the source of the signal coming from a nearby high-rise. There, she finds a bunch of degenerates wired into the minds of these rogue boomers, getting off on the thrills that come with running for your life. Michelson guns down the place, although she is careful not to kill anyone, even though it seems she really wants to. Then she gets a message from Buzz and Kimball requesting backup and heads straight over. Those two track down another rogue boomer to a radio DJ's apartment. This boomer thinks he's in love with his boss and attempts to romance her with an unconventional display of affection. There's a bit of a scuffle, and the lady grabs Kimball's gun and glacks the bad robot. By the time Michelson shows up, the show is over. Well, technically there's still one other boomer out there that's gonna go rogue any minute now, but Buzz already knows where this one is since he's, married to it. Episode 2 jumps ahead 1 year. Boomer prostitutes are being killed left and right. Michelson is tasked with figuring out who's behind the killings and why they're doing it. Of course, Buzz and Kimball are still there too, providing input and making sure Michelson doesn't get into any trouble she can't get herself out of. Eventually, they find out about the creme de la creme of boomer prostitutes, Eve. She's somehow different from the rest. I'd tell you why, but like I said earlier, I don't even know what sex is. I feel like it's probably not that though. But what I can tell you is that Eve is having dreams. Michelson actually runs into her while she's working undercover and follows her into a ritzy hotel. When Eve starts doing something I can't show, she slips into a trance and sees a little girl in red, which causes her to freak out and accidentally kill her patron. Michelson enters the room, and a black cat, which had been following her for a little while, turns into a weird robot tentacle monster thing that shoots lasers. Turns out this is the thing that's been killing all the boomer prostitutes. But why? Well, this wasn't the first time Eve manslaughtered while making love. Her first victim was the CEO of Genom, which is a little odd, but yeah, we'll get back to that later. Michelson and Eve run from the hotel to Eve's home, but the Boomer Crusher doesn't let up. Backup is on the way, but it doesn't look like they'll make it in time. Luckily, Michelson is able to overgirl power her foe. Unfortunately, Eve has another delusion and walks herself right off a cliff. Michelson burst into tears. She never really thought much of Boomers before, but Eve, she felt human to her. She could feel her emotions, her fears, and her dreams.
イブは人間だったよ。
On the cold concrete floor, we see the little girl in red close Eve's eyes, giggle, and run off, and then fade into nothingness. 5 years pass and we're in episode 3. Boomers are still going rogue and still getting killed. But now, a new anti-boomer terrorist group is making moves in Mega Tokyo. At the same time, the chief of branch has disappeared. Nasty rumors surround Chief Takahashi. Some people suspect he was on the take for who knows what. And now that he's been missing for a minute, many are saying the guy has been taken out by his real master. The AD Police have launched an investigation in the matter and tasked Branch with confirming his status. Kimball and Michelson go out on patrol, while Buzz gets Myers to hack into Takahashi's bank account to find any relevant records. This is highly illegal, by the way, and equally difficult, but Myers pulls it off somehow.
俺の口座増やしておいていいか？ダメだ。エンジェル、天才の俺様と今晩どう？
いいや。
They now have access to the info they need, but before they can do anything, a military-grade helicopter chases down Michelson and Kimball along the highway and blows them up. Meanwhile, Buzz is heading over to the Normal Police HQ to talk with his old friend Kajima. He wants to ask him about all he found on Takahashi's personal account. Through their conversation, Buzz learns that Takahashi has been connected to a powerful politician named Kenji Sorime for many years now. Sorime is the Minister of Justice in Japan and a potential candidate for president in the upcoming election. But back in his college days, he partook in the Puff Puff Pass and paid Takahashi to make the incident go away. He's been on the take ever since, along with the current chief of the Normal Police too. But unlike the chief of the Normal Police, Takahashi didn't work for Sorime solely for monetary gain. He actually believed in his political positions, especially his anti-boomer policies. As you've probably guessed by now, Sorime is the leader of that new anti-boomer terrorist group. He's also coked out of his mind. Takahashi tried to sober the guy up, but Sorime didn't like that. Kajima tells him Takahashi was still alive a week ago, but he has no idea where he is now. And before Buzz can ask another question, everything starts exploding. The city skyline is engulfed in flame and smoke, and Kajima is in disbelief. He didn't think Sorime was serious about this. Buzz demands an explanation, and Kajima tells him Sorime just fixed Tokyo's biggest problem. He just blew up all of Genom's boomer facilities, and Buzz is actually the one behind it all. You see, he had written a thesis back in college about the growing dangers of urban crime, and how theoretically, a terror cell could use the electrical power that flows through security lines to stealthily set off explosions and P3 bombs. They wouldn't emit a signal, and they wouldn't be easily spotted by maintenance checks either. And they could all be linked together so that when one goes off, the rest go off too. That's why Buzz called this the domino effect explosion system. And although he only entertained the idea as a hypothetical, Sorime read his paper and turned it into a reality. Buzz is framed for the whole thing, and his teammates Angel and Myers are murdered by Genom to keep things quiet. Sorime got away with it. For a couple of hours at least. You see, Takahashi had left an incriminating tape with Kajima to give to Buzz in the event that something happened to him. Buzz gives the tapes over to the media and then breaks into Sorime's house to make sure the truth gets out. He knows Sorime could just pay off the press, so he plans on killing him before that happens. Well, actually, it's not Buzz who will do the killing. Michelson survived thanks to Kimball shielding her from the explosion. She and Buzz are the only ones left of Branch now, so Buzz decides he needs to send his friends off with a bang. He takes Michelson's gun and fires a shot into his target for the first time since he killed that little girl. Parasite Dolls is a light at the end of the tunnel, a short and sweet send-off to a franchise filled with ups and downs. Not the most emotional roller coaster at the Martin Scorsese Cinema amusement park, but a thoroughly decent experience nevertheless. Visually, Parasite Dolls is probably my favorite show in the franchise, followed closely by the original OVA. I need to remind you, Parasite Dolls released in 2003, a time where many anime were making the switch from cell animation to digital. Most of this OVA is done with the former method, though there are certain digital effects added in the first 2 episodes. The 3rd episode, though, has so many filters and effects added that it almost loses the cell animation feel completely. It took a second for me to get used to it, but I actually do like the look, even if it can be a bit much at times. Story-wise, each episode never dipped below decent, and I'd say the same thing for the characters too. There are only a couple of things that keep me from calling this thing a masterpiece. The first is a familiar problem. The exact same criticism I had for the AD Police OVA applies here. You know, the one I made the chart for? I mean, there's no grown woman crying about how horny she is, but there may be something more ridiculous. You remember that anti-boomer terrorist group I mentioned? This is how they were introduced. Look, I don't want to repeat myself in a video that's already too long, but this kind of stuff makes it so that I just can't take it seriously. I mean, I understand he's a deranged drug addict high on his own self-delusions and drugs, but you don't have to be so explicit. Although, if I wanted to be charitable here, I might say these guys deserve a round of applause for replicating the same horny, edgy vibe from the first AD Police outing. I just wish they replicated something else. AD Police felt like a Bubblegum Crisis story. Sure, it was more edgy and horny, but it had the look and the feel, and a couple of familiar faces to boot. My biggest problem with Parasite Dolls? It's not anything that's shown, it's all the stuff that isn't. Where are the Nightsabers? Where is Largo? Where is Leon? Where is anything that connects this series to Bubblegum Crisis? I'm not saying that the Nightsabers have to be here. I'm saying there should be some explanation for why they aren't, and why no one seems to remember them. They aren't mentioned at all in Parasite Dolls. Nothing from the OVA is brought up. They've apparently left no impact on Mega Tokyo despite everything they've done. I'm not asking for much. I'd be fine with some street art in the background dedicated to them, or a single line by other AD police officers wishing they were still around, or I don't know, another vigilante group that's been inspired by them, or just something. Anything, really. The only returning character from this OVA is, I guess, Quincy, maybe, if I understand this right? I mean, in episode 2, they clearly state that Eve killed the CEO of Genom, and the CEO of Genom is Quincy, an enigmatic figure who seemingly never dies. Quincy might actually be the most hyped up nobody in any series I've ever seen, because there's all this mystery surrounding the guy, but he never actually does anything. And none of the main characters even care about him that much. I can't tell deliberate omission from unintentional exclusion. Did they forget certain characters, or did they think linking this OVA to Crash might scare off casuals? But then I gotta ask, who was the target audience for this thing? I had assumed hardcore fans of the original, which is why it's not set in the 2040 timeline, but maybe that's not the case. When you take a step back and just look at Parasite Dolls, it doesn't really look like Bubblegum Crisis. It's less colorful and, I don't know, less 80s maybe. The BGC was always kind of bleak, but most of that stuff was kept to the background. It didn't shy away from violence and gore, but it also didn't shy away from cutesy stuff either. Plus it had the whole Femme Squad thing going on. Now I'll be honest here, I found out about Bubblegum Crisis a while back, but I initially wrote it off as something that just wasn't for me. The title and the girl-centric cast made me think the series was like one of those magical girl shows. Sailor Moon with cybersuits, that was my impression of BGC. But one day, in my edgy arc, I was searching out top 10 videos, adding more schlock to the plan to watch, and I found out about, among other things, Parasite Dolls. I knew immediately that I wanted to watch it, but then I discovered it was part of the Bubblegum Crisis franchise. I saw that I technically didn't need to watch all of the other stuff to enjoy it, but I kinda just felt like watching it all anyway, since I now realized my impression of the franchise was wrong. So I guess what I'm saying with this little anecdote is that Parasite Dolls was made for people like me. People who didn't know much about Bubblegum, but could be made into franchise fans with just a little taste. And if that was the goal the whole time, then I guess it worked, but I'm still gonna complain now that you got me here. But like I already said, I really don't have many complaints about Parasite Dolls. Buzz was a cool protagonist, everyone in Branch had a fun dynamic to him, and I appreciated the more mature visuals and tone. Even the unceremonious deaths of Angel and Myers don't bother me one bit. I actually love it. It makes it feel like the city really is a death trap, and if you cross the wrong people or get too comfortable in your line of work, that's it. And I did feel something seeing those character deaths. Parasite Dolls managed to make me like these guys, despite how little screen time they got. I love the energy from Myers and how Buzz was the only one who could rein him in. Kimball played a great straight man, and Michelson was fun in every scene she's in. And Angel was hot. I mean, I could try to stretch out all my points of praise, but the bottom line is, I thought Parasite Dolls was really good. Maybe even the best in the entire franchise. Which is weird because it's a sideshow, but whatever. Also, that appears to be the minority opinion. Most people didn't even watch this one, and those who did claimed it was just okay. The DVDs didn't sell, so no sequels were ever made. Kind of a shame, but maybe it was for the best. At least Bubblegum Crisis got to go out on a high note. The 2000s were challenging for AIC. The once popular Bubblegum Crisis had yet to turn a real profit. And while AIC had other titles that did, things weren't exactly going well. I won't bore you with the entire corporate history, but the short version is that many producers left to form other animation studios, and eventually, AIC split itself into two companies, AIC and AIC Rights. Rights got the copyrights for most of the old school stuff from Artmic and 90s AIC, while the main AIC company kept everything else. In 2017, Rights launched the Anime Reboot Project Initiative to celebrate AIC's 35th anniversary, but they didn't have the money or the manpower to actually release anything. That's when Toei stepped in to form a business alliance in which both companies would co-own the copyrights for these old anime. That all got finalized in 2021, and so far, nothing has come of it. Rights had been crowdfunding a campaign for a Megazone 2-3 reboot since 2017, and we do know it's in the works. It's just not coming out anytime soon. But as for Bubblegum Crisis, well, Parasite Dolls came out in 2003. It's been 21 years and nothing else has come out. Nothing except for an obscure light novel from 2012, which reimagined the Night Sabers as high school girls. It sounds terrible, to be honest, but one thing that's interesting to me is that Celia and Nene lost their foreign names, and they have black hair now. And Leon is Nene's adopted brother.
If this situation wasn't so serious, I'd spank her for that one.
She only does it because she thinks of you as the brother she never had.
And probably a lot of other weird changes too that we will never know about. I'm not even sure if there's an English translation available, and I don't really care to find out. But now here's the question on everyone's mind. Should Bubblegum Crisis come back? Honestly, I don't know my answer to that. I'm not exactly foaming at the mouth for more, at least not at the moment, but I wouldn't mind another crack at things. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. A new series could take the best of every entry and make the perfect version. I'd want the character focus of 2040 in the 80s cyberpunk world of classic BGC. The AD Police stuff could be another sideshow if the main thing pops off. But the most important thing is that this new Bubblegum Crisis feels like an unapologetic 80s OVA, but with an aspect ratio of 16:9 instead of 4:3. Now that goes for the soundtrack, the designs, and the visuals. And by visuals, I mostly mean like gore and nudity and stuff. Like nothing too excessive, but something that's fitting for a cyberpunk show. If you want an example of what I mean, then, cyberpunk. Which actually brings me to my next point. I think Netflix should be involved. Now, I know, we hate them, but I don't think Bubblegum does well on TV. It was an OVA series through and through, and the modern day OVA equivalent is the ONA. You wouldn't have to worry about TV censorship rules or runtimes. Now, you might have to worry about other things, but I mean, hey, that's more or less in line with the original intention anyway, so let's call that life imitating art. Putting on my tinfoil hat for a minute, I think Netflix is interested in such a proposal. Real Patriots have informed me that a certain song from Bubblegum Crisis is played in an episode of Scott Pilgrim. I can't confirm this because I will not watch that show no matter what. I am not about to let Scott Pilgrim ruin another generation of women. Bubblegum Crisis could be another Cyberpunk Edgerunners for Netflix. I just hope the show wouldn't be another Cyberpunk Edgerunners. They are very different shows. Please don't copy and paste themes and story beats and character stuff. I'll let Christine Ott voice Priss in the English dub. Actually, it'd be really cool if you guys did what you did for Great Pretender and combine all the international dubs. I really dig that stuff. And that about wraps things up. So until next time, what's that? I've forgotten something. Oh, that's right. Suzuki. I never finished his story, did I? Alright then, one more inconclusive conclusion. We last left off on Suzuki going on the run for using a Yakuza family to threaten employees at AIC. What happened next is still unclear, but after more than 20 years, we finally got some pieces to the puzzle. Suzuki left a lot behind when he went on the run. His friends, his wife, and his son. A son who couldn't stop thinking about the father he hardly knew. A great man by some accounts, a villain according to others. It's through his son that we learned of Suzuki's fate. He passed away in January of 2020. He had been living a quiet life under a different name, painting pictures to make ends meet. I'm not gonna pretend like I knew all the particulars of why Suzuki did the things he did. Was he a good guy or a bad guy? I don't know. According to his son, he was eager. Eager to start a family, eager to make a name for himself, eager to build up his company, and eager to make all his problems go away. Now, I don't want to excuse all the bad things Suzuki did, but the guy's dead now, so let's just leave it be. He was an interesting fellow with a very interesting story, and he's responsible for some of the best retro anime I can think of. So if nothing else, let his story exemplify the double-edged sword that is true, unbridled passion. Okay, now it really is over. But before I go, I just want to thank you guys for all the support you've shown me. I've had some people asking about a Patreon, so, I set one of those up if you feel like helping a brother out. Also, we hit 10k subs. That's pretty cool. What's even more cool is that I finally made enough money from the channel to build a proper PC. I really am shocked that the last retrospective didn't blow up my laptop. Hopefully this means I can pump out more videos in less time. So until next time, Ave Maria, Deus Vult, and the next one's not going to be as long, I promise.